So our speaker today, Mohammad Al-Ansari, is actually a former resident of this program, so now officially an alum. Uh, Back in his day, we started 10 minutes late on everything, so we're keeping in that tradition. Um, Mohammed has moved on from his degree here at Semenis, the Center for Middle Eastern and North African Studies, and is now studying higher education and student affairs at the University of Iowa as a PhD candidate, where he is working on research on the purpose of higher education, students' aspirations and motivations for pursuing a college degree, as well as the development of education policy in Qatar. So he is also a senior research assistant at Qatar University's Social and Economic Survey Research Institute. So you have a very broad profile. And maybe just as importantly, as you've seen from the photo that went around with the poster, he is the proud Baba of two cats, Pippin and Winry. Yeah. And will obviously be saying "Go Blue" a lot today as a former alum here and somebody who is no stranger to Ann Arbor, where his father was also an alum. So we wish to welcome Mohammad Al-Ansari, where he'll be speaking on all the places they will go, Qatari high school students and their college choice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jay. Hi, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohammad Hassan Al-Ansari. As Jay graciously introduced me, I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Iowa, fifth year. Crazy. I cannot believe that the PhD journey has gone that fast. And I still have another year to go because, as I'll tell you about, me just getting my data and stuff. And dissertation plans never go according to plan. So I was hoping to graduate this semester, but that did not happen. So now I'm waiting for another year. So that's awesome. But like I said, thank you so much to Jay and Warsaw for reaching out and everything, and inviting me here back to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and especially to a place that is very beloved and dear to my heart. If you don't know, yes, my dad was alum, did his PhD here and everything, and he instilled everything Michigan into his kids, and specifically me, took it very to heart. And I was very privileged enough to come here and do my master's at Semenis, which was a great time and learned a lot. And as I'll say, some inspiration did come from the courses I took here and what led me down to this path of higher education, rather than like political science or history, which I thought I was going to do, but you never know. A little bit about myself. My undergrad was at Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa. It's a very tiny little liberal arts. You know what? I should hold this button right here. This thing right here. I'm switching it on my other computer. But I did my undergrad at Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa. My master's here at Semenis at the University of Michigan, and now my PhD at the Higher Education and Student Affairs. My journey through these in college is important because it explains a little bit of my inspiration for this dissertation project, and like why college choice. And the most budding interest and it's never-ending question I've always asked is, why do we go to college and why do we do it? So Cornell, there was a lot to do with education in terms of it being a small liberal arts school. Had a very profound effect on my life because I was in small classes and meeting teachers and professors, and to this day I'm very close with to this day. And that profound me in a way of like, I want to do this one day. I want to help students. I want to be involved in teaching them. But the last class I ever took at Cornell was part of my international relations major, which was a subfield of women in politics, was women in politics in India. And that had a profound effect on my life because we ended up in a small village where the women were the village leaders, which was very uncommon there. And they basically received so much education about health that the men just elected them to be the village leaders because they knew more about health and stuff like that. And that had a profound effect on me, that education was something that I would consider, but it wasn't ready yet. So then I went to the University of Michigan here at Semenis, and I thought I was going to do more. I did more into like gender studies, of the Middle East, and political science and history. And I thought that's where my road would take me. But after some different trials and tribulations, and then also going back home to work on the education project of Qatar that's sponsored by CESRI and the Ministry of Education and Higher Education, I found that education was my calling. And so that is how I ended up here. And that leads me to the sort of inspirations I got from the project. But I wanted to give a special shout out to Mark Tesler's class, which is where I wrote an interesting research proposal that looked at the sort of how does the rentier state affect college majors. And this project idea came on the backing of the Emir of Qatar's speech in 2015, which I frequently go back to because it really, I got to watch it not live, but like the day after the recording and watched it because there was a moment that really spoke to me, as one would think with, you know, the leader of your country. But it was something that really did speak to me about education and the purpose of education. And so it was towards the end of this address that the Emir, His Royal Highness, the Emir of Qatar, looked to the youth and told them about the future of Qatar. He said, "I would like to take a short pause here to address the Qatari youth. Qatar's economy cannot dispense with foreign expertise and labor. This is true, yet Qatar cannot be built without you, the Qataris, and cannot be built on a limited number of professions and specialties. There are vital sectors of the state, such like the field of security, army, police, and even planning, management, engineering, medicine, scientific research, and social sciences, where we need the Qatari youth, and that the Qatari youth must proceed to master these specialities and take their homeland into account when making those decisions." It was sort of, in a sense, a John F. Kennedy moment of asking the Qatari youth to reflect on these questions. What did I give for my country and community? What are the best ways to be useful? And what can I do to contribute to the national wealth of my country so that future generations can benefit? Because, as he was pointing out, we will not have this natural gas wealth forever. And so there needs to be a time to also consider what to do now. So this sort of speech influenced my thinking on education and Qatar specifically, because the popular things we talk about specifically in like the Gulf region, I would think, is national security and geopolitical, like oil politics and gas politics and economic stuff. And I was very interested in the more social science aspects of looking at like education as one aspect that I could hopefully, inshallah, make a change for Qatar. And so why college choice? It really stems from my own experience as someone that I was lucky enough to have gone to an international school and being told by a counselor that told my father immediately not to consider the big institutions, but to consider a small liberal arts school in middle of nowhere, Iowa, I like to say. But having that experience of going through that process was so different from what many Qataris might go through. And what I've seen in Qatar, it is very much the similar routes of either you stay locally or you go to the British schools, because it's very easy to get into the British school because there's a lot of like growing institutes that can help you make it easy, then rather than going through the American system, which is a whole rigorous like thing of like going through the Common App and all these sort of things. And most Qataris will tell you they don't want to deal with that. So we need to find what's the easiest way. But again, this all leads to this budding interest of mine that I sort of came up with as I came into higher education of why do we go to college? What is the purpose of higher education? And a lot of my research, well, a lot of my time in classes have spoken about like, what do Americans think of college? And let me tell you, it is a not very pleasant and positive vibe in terms of what they see. There's been many articles that I have read on like surveys and things like that, and polls about like what do people think, and it's slowly going down and or showing negative responses of like why, like I don't see the reason to go to college anymore and stuff like that. So that stemmed from me to wondering, okay, well, Qatar is different. So how is Qatar different? Well, first, I would like to give a little bit of a brief history of education in Qatar, starting first with like the K through 12 side of things. But originally, they had these kutubs, meaning like education itself or a place of education, which mostly entailed in like religious teachings. And this is sort of what was seen like before the 50s, before modern education. But as Dr. Al-Musnad states in her well-timed piece that she wrote in 1985 about the history of education and modern education in Qatar, modern education came at a later time for Qatar as opposed to the rest of the Gulf states. This was due to a lot of like tension between the royal family members in control and not many people showing interest in it. But the first sort of modern schools opened in about the early 50s, and then later in the 60s, 70s is when girls' schools started to become more prominent. And they were mostly the reforms that took place after the fact sort of were about the like 70s and the 80s, whereas when they were really starting to um, develop a simple goal of like what can we do to meet the standards and growing population of Qatar at that time, or like what as a nation state, I should say, what are the important things in hopes to continue the growth of education, like what is taught and what is important for the society at that time. The first major reforms kind of took place in the 90s, but they didn't make that much of an impact as what we will see in the early 2000s and the Rand Corporation and the reforms then. That is when Qatar's education really starts to take off because they partnered with Rand, and it sort of it substantially changed the education system. But whether or not was a success is up for debate and such to this point in time. But as a part of those Rand Corporate, as part of like Qatar's movement and trying to move into this new age of like education and everything, as a part of their Qatar National Vision 2030, Qatar was looking and wants to be a knowledge-based economy so that they could wean off from the sort of natural resource wealth that they get. And so as a part of that, Qatar in the history of their like higher education, they would open up these many different like branch campuses that are US based, UK based. Examples are Northwestern, Georgetown, but they are, I should say, while they are branch campuses, they're specified to a certain like topic or major. So like Georgetown was foreign affairs, political science. Texas A&M was like engineering. And so these schools began to open up in the late 2000s and beyond. There's been many more that have kind of opened up and closed and things like that. But importantly, in 1977, Qatar University was formed. It once was a sort of like teachers' college, but then moved and became a full like public institution in Qatar. So this leads me to, I gave you that context and things of the like education in Qatar in the background. This has led me to my research questions that I'm interested in. What factors are associated with Qatari high school students' decision to apply to college/university abroad or locally? And then what factors are associated with the Qatari parents in helping their child's decision to apply to college/university abroad or locally? The reason why I chose to talk with parents as well, or interview parents as well in the project and everything, is because I wanted to do one, obviously a comparison between the two and seeing are they matching in terms of how they view where they would like to go and how they apply to college. And then parents are very integral, I still think to this day, in especially in undergraduate education, are very still much involved in where their children go to school. And so this is sort of the leading like questions that are driving my like dissertation currently at this moment. So a little bit of literature review. So I started obviously talking in a more, I wanted to first start out in a more broad sense of college choice, and especially looking at college choice models that have been used and to study this sort of decision-making process. And there have been many like models that have come out from Hosner and Gardner, which was sort of the first to really take in the decision-making process of looking like a three-step process of how students make decisions to where they want to go to school and such like that. But one that I'm very like familiar with is Laura Perna, and she is another one of those inspirations for this project and this dissertation, in the sense that she ended up taking Hosner and Gardner's piece, but ended up adding a bit more of the context piece, like socioeconomic status as one, race, like racial and ethnic groups, as a way to like understand what is the decision making that students are making. To name a few, McLewis was one of the ones that sort of took Perna's and made it as the ever ending. Everyone has a model, I call it, or keeps on trying to improve everybody else's model. McLewis also talks a bit, wanted to go more into a more critical lens of looking at like racial like variables, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, like racial aspects in how students make their decisions and things like that. Which leads me to the model that I have really been impacted by, and a model that has been used specifically really to international students, is the push and pull model. This model is derived from Everett Lee, Lee's work in 1966, who was looking at sort of migration, took migration theory and applied it to how students are pushed and pulled to certain countries when it comes to their college choice. Several other scholars have eventually they developed and took Lee's idea and started like introducing different push and pull factors that sort of looked at more economic, educational, and political factors. For instance, push factors like a decline in the country's natural resources, or loss of employment, price of education, benefits to studying in another country, or mistreatment due to ideological reasons, could play a factor in how students view where they want to eventually go to school. And so the push, as I sort of mentioned, is these, sort of what's pushing them to seek opportunities to sort of study abroad rather than locally. And then the pull factors are more like what is pulling them. This can be from the image of the country, the weather, the location, the university's reputation, recognition of the degree from the university, faculty, and teaching reputation, and other locational factors. In 1992, McMahon was the first person to really sort of take all the stuff that had been up to that point and really create what is now we see the push and pull model. And again, eventually more people had other things they thought should have been added as well. One thing I would like to say about the push and pull model, it primarily in the early stages of its like research and people using it was looking at Eastern Asian students moving from east to west. And that was like the big topic and what most articles were looking at. In terms of Qatar and college choice, there's not really that much. It's a very small sort of looking point at like how, but like under researched topic that have looked. There's one by Mustafa et al. 2018 was looking at not just Qatari but non-Qatari. This actually was done by my colleagues in Qatar, but it wasn't like the project that they had gotten. Their data was really focused on college choice. It was more like a subset, and so it kind of gave like more of a descriptive lens of like, this is kind of what we're seeing and how people are making decisions and where they want to go to college. The rest of these are all, funny enough, dissertation. as a lot of people have been interested in understanding high school, like especially looking at like why do they remain in Qatar for their post-secondary education, like more like focused route, and then looking at the effects of like how scholarship list affects people's decision making, which is an important distinction because Qatar has the scholarship list, and if you apply to a school on the scholarship list, you technically get like a free ride to go to said university. So it's kind of encouraged to apply to a school on the scholarship, and how. So Nasser et al. Looked at that sort of how does that play a role in that matter. But in a sense, again, there hasn't been much. So it was very hard to sort of talk about like literature and stuff like that. But I had to look at other different topics as well. Going back to my roots of gender studies, there has been a lot of like talk about like how do women make those decisions of just going to college. And so there was some interesting overlap that I found within that Qatar and college choice aspects. So I get to the fun part, thing part I don't really like the most of, but the methods. But like I said at the beginning, I just got my data about 2 weeks ago, so I have not had the most time to really get to dive in and enjoy searching like what are the cool things. So today I will present a little bit of findings that I've been interested in, some descriptives of like questions. I'm like, I really want to know, what do people really think about this thing? And then some small little regressions to sort of see like some initial steps of like what my models can look like, what my models will look like, and what am I interested in seeing, and what relationships are we seeing in terms of applying abroad or locally. So first of all, I'd like to thank CESRI, the Social and Economic Survey Research Institute, for helping me with the project. They had a project that was up and coming about college choice. It was lucky me. I guess that's one of the cool things about being a PhD student, is that sometimes you can just get a little lucky. But I was able to add some questions in just to like make sure I had a good enough dissertation that it was good that I can like get some extra things to know about in terms of like factors, especially me using the push and pull model. The questionnaire development was done in both English and Arabic. We both had for the students and the parents. The target population, like I said, was Qatari High School students and their parents. So one of the things, I guess, we'll go right here to the survey mode, was we used what we call pen and paper interviewing, PAPI, for both students and parents. So students would be given the time to fill out the survey via paper, and then they would be given a packet to then take home to their parents, and then you would hope they would return it as one of the things. What we ended up getting was about 1,250 students to fill it out, and about 900 parents, which was pretty good because I'll tell you, parents don't usually write back or fill out the survey from their child. So that's one of the things we've always had problems, especially in the education project. The sampling frame was a randomized list of schools from the ministry. It's not something we can technically control because they just give you this list of the schools they approve and everything. One of the hardest things I think in my analysis of the data so far is that a lot of the schools and the population of students are from public. Private do get to say no. And so that's one of the hard things to do, is it's hard to sort of diversify. So, but with the public schools, they have no choice in the matter. If the government says something, you should do it. So that's one of the things I started seeing early on, and I'm like, interesting, can't really do a really good comparison between public and private schools. So the analysis parameter, first, obviously, I'm going to talk about descriptives. Then a new thing that I'm having to learn about as I'm going into this dissertation is latent class analysis. It's sort of like a reduction of the variables to make them manageable for regressions, because I will tell you, I have way too many variables, and so it'd be very hard to run regression models with all of them all at once. So what latent class does, it sort of fits them into like these classes. So in a sense, what we could see is like we maybe have a class for those who are abroad and those who are local, but also like those who are, maybe if they're a female student or a male student, like where does that fit into those decisions? And so latent class does that, where it sort of categorizes them into little pockets so that it makes it easier to understand, and then going into the regressions of like what factors actually do affect students in their college choice and decision making. Next up, this is sort of something that comes from push and pull models, but this is sort of the levels that I'm looking at in terms of like the models, you could say. So we have one side that is like the individual model, this individual level of like family, like talking to family and friends, talking to your counselor and teacher, career advancement for your personal gain, attendance of like information fairs to like go and learn things, learning and improving a new language, cultural enrichment. So it's more of like that individualness of like, these are the reasons why I'm choosing to go to a certain place based on my own individual level. And then we have the school level, which is very self-explanatory of like, the quality of your degree, the application process, reputation of school, reputation of faculty, is my major available there. And then the country level is sort of this like attractiveness of the country is like, some of the schools in like Spain or like West Coast America, there's some really pretty campuses, or like, British Columbia, I always remember British Columbia, really beautiful. But like safety of the country, the visa application to get into said country, the proximity to Qatar, the climate, and sort of religious / my identity tolerance are some of these like major like major push and pull factors that have sort of separated out into these levels, and that I'm interested in looking at which of these levels really are important, especially to Qataris and stuff like that. So we get to a little bit of descriptives of some ones that I was interested in knowing. Now, I would like to say they are coded in a binary. They were like a 4-point Likert scale sort of thing, and I coded them to a 0 and 1, of like 0 being negative for some and 1 being positive. So these are ones I kind of picked out because they kind of were interesting to me, particularly like, this one, prestige of obtaining a degree outside of Qatar, was really heavily not that important, which I was like, interesting. I'm wondering like if there's like, these are future questions I will think about after this dissertation of like interesting things of like, why is that? Why is getting a prestige is not that important anymore? Maybe it's because of like Qatar's continued development of their higher education sector. It could be just geopolitical things that are happening in the neighborhood and things like that. Degree from a university in Qatar for job opportunities was also kind of like 50-50. The satisfaction with higher education, that was something I was interested in, of like, I guess a lot of people do like the higher education institutes in Qatar. Recommendation from friends. This one was interesting because if you know anything about the Khalij people, they love going together. They don't like going alone all the time. So we always like to go with somebody, maybe a cousin, a friend, or somebody. So it's always like, that's a very like common trend amongst the Khalij. But it wasn't that important to them, which was interesting. I'm trying to remember, there was something that was interesting, that they're like, yes, I'm applying to the same school as my friends, but it's not that important that I'm going to the same school as my friends, which was interesting. This part, especially talking about the teachers, is also it wasn't important, not important, which was fascinating to me because I'm like, interesting that they don't really, I think I have it in here of like them talking, do they talk to their teacher or counselor about their college choice and stuff like that. Plan to visit the university they're interested in. It was like really high up with like 63 yes and 37 no. And then being close to Qatar was 50-50. So that was interesting. But of course, I would love to see it when it's attaching to those who are applying locally and who's applying abroad, sort of thing. So the first model, there's a lot of stuff because the first model had a lot of things I was really interested in and throwing in, and I decided I wanted to keep it like that. But we have the gender, we have the demographics of like gender, father and mother's education. Did they take an IB or advanced placement class? Visiting the teacher / counselor, recommendation, talking with their siblings, other family members, friends, parents, and recommendation of the parents, other families, friends, and whether they are applying to the same university as friends. In doing this sort of mini like logistic regression of just these variables alone, because I was interested, I call it like the communication side of it. Really only gender was, in terms of negative being those who are applying locally, visiting your counselor teacher was positive for those who are wanting to apply abroad. Talking to siblings meant they were more likely to stay in Qatar, and recommendation of other family members as well. So that's very telling of like, interesting that, other like talking to your immediate family and things like that have plays more of an effect on them wanting to stay. Gender, I mean, kind of makes sense to me because a lot of females don't get the opportunity to get to go abroad. So maybe they're more likely to apply locally instead. When it comes to the university level, the model 2, again, the previous demographics from the previous model, but the reputation of faculty, university, application process, the importance of having your major, the cost, the ease of finding information on the university website, visiting a university, and the universities of being close to Qatar. What ended up coming out was that gender again played an important factor. Visiting the universities for those definitely who are applying abroad, and then being close to Qatar as well. Being the sort of localness of maybe they're just like, yeah, well, I'm going to apply here because I'd rather just be in Qatar than be outside. And thus leads to the final level sort of model that I was looking at, the country level, which again takes place all the other first models, and then what are the weather of the country, the visa process, the safety of the country, the tolerance of your identity, and experiencing a new culture. Again, gender was a significant sort of finding, but interestingly enough, only the visa and experiencing a new college for those definitely applying abroad was an important factor to this. Then I took the whole model and just said, okay, let's see what happens when you put all of it together and see how does this come out and everything. Again, gender is important. Again, counselor, teachers, positive, being close to Qatar was positive. These were positive for those who are applying abroad, and these were important factors to them when applying. So what do we see? Gender was significant across the models and lead towards many choosing to stay locally. I think it speaks for itself that, again, the whole notion of like not a lot of women are allowed to leave the country and therefore stay locally. And then visiting the counselor and teacher to discuss their college choice leans towards wanting to apply abroad. And the same could be said for those who were. So that was sort of something interesting I was seeing. Again, I think once I get into the sort of reduction of the variables and stuff, it would be a more clear picture of what is going to take place and stuff like that, and leading them into those decisions, and then also comparing with their parents as well. So what comes next? Well, tidying up the data, because there's a lot of that I still need to get going on, and still like having to just play around with it and everything. Latent class analysis, again, there are a lot of variables that are included in each of these models, and so trying to find out, do they fit together, like which variables fit together, and sort of thing of like, it's the communications, do they all fit together, do these other things fit together, is something I'm going to do. Regressions, as always, to like, see the sort of predictiveness of like, what are the factors that really play an effect on whether applying locally or abroad. And then obviously finishing this dissertation and being ready to take it back to Qatar, and hopefully education leaders to sort of show what comes next for us, because education is always moving, and in Qatar, it's a hot topic in a way of like, where do students want to go, and where are we sending our kids where are we sending the students to school and stuff like that, and has that changed in any way from what we know contemporary of like the typical norm of mostly going across this ocean and stuff like that to go and study. These are my references. Thank you. Any questions?
Online.
Sure. So we could start with some of those. All right, so we have one question here. In terms of collecting data in Qatar, do you have advice for others who may be interested in that population?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, because it's hard because I work at the institute that's collecting this data. I mean, I think you should always reach out to the institute because you never know. That sometimes they do, like I know, especially at my workplace, we do have open source data, but it depends on like the project, and you have to wait a certain time before it becomes an open access thing because of whoever the sponsors are of the.
You should remind them of the name of the institute.
The Social and Economic Survey Research Institute at Qatar University. Yeah, I would just say reach out to certain places. It is difficult, I will not lie. It is a very difficult because I don't know, we don't like just giving data out pretty easily and stuff like that. But I would say reaching out, it never hurts to reach out and just ask if you can know what kind of data and stuff like that. I have no idea about like at my institute still, we used to, I haven't been there in a while, but we used to like post what projects were going on. But I have no idea if that's the case anymore because there's change in management, so everything changes every time you go into that. But yeah, I would just say reach out to the different institutes, see what sort of data is around and stuff like that, because there is data. But yeah, that'd be the best I would say.
Just a follow-up question to that of how would the challenges you face conducting research in Qatar be similar or different in other Middle Eastern countries? Maybe you can focus on the GCC as to start out.
Repeat the question again.
Yeah.
What's like the
what are like the challenges that you face conducting research in Qatar? How would those be similar or different to other countries?
I think obviously it does help being a Qatari and a local, so I think that does help. I think that's obviously one of the first challenges. It's definitely or one ways to skirt that challenge is because I am a local, and it is easy when you're working with institution that's doing that research and stuff like that. I think that's first. I think that is a challenge, regardless of whether like. I think it's also not just a challenge about being local or anything, but it's also a challenge for those. I would see a lot of challenge in being asked questions because people don't like being asked questions. It's like, it's interesting as someone that has now like worked in accessory for like golly, almost 10 plus years now. It's amazing how much people are willing to talk, but at the same time, they're still like very reserved, skeptical. And so there's many challenges in that. So that would be a challenge, is getting people to talk, because why do you want to ask those questions? Like, these are the types of things we've faced many times. And it took, I know accessory in particular, a long time to build that rapport in the Qatari population and everything like that to ask these questions and stuff like that. So
sure, yeah. So do you think like there are other similar institutes in other countries that might be able to?
Yes, I think Kuwait has one, UAE has. Those are if you're interested in other Middle East, I would recommend talking. I know Mark Tesler's the Arab Barometer is an open source data, and they do look at some GCC countries and stuff like that. So that's a data set that's open source that has data. I don't know how many, I know there's it changes every year, like what topics get asked and stuff like that. But I know that they've worked in Kuwait, in UAE. They have 2 centers there that collaborate on the Arab Barometer project.
Are there questions from anybody here that wants to?
Yes, Dr.
Well, we were talking the other day, and you were saying that the government might be preferring that Qatari students come to the United States for their doctorates. And you didn't say anything about the ways in which the availability of scholarships for certain points, or you didn't go into it in any detail.
I didn't get too much.
So would you like to expand on that issue?
Yeah, so obviously there's conflicting information I've heard that doesn't come from official channels, but hearing from students who are currently applying and stuff like that. One of the things that I've been seeing from young students who are applying on scholarship lists and everything is that they are telling Qataris, while they want, one of the things me and Dr. Cole had discussed last night was Qatar is very adamant on sending graduate students to do graduate work overseas rather than staying in Qatar. And that's because Qatar doesn't have that many of the like graduate programs. So they're really still encouraging them to go out to do graduate work. But for the undergrad and some of the things I've heard through like grapevine of like students who are going through the process, I've had some cousins talk about it and stuff like that, is when applying for a scholarship or applying to go like say, hey, I'm going to go apply abroad, will you sponsor me and things like that? The first thing the ministry is always asking is, what are you majoring in? Right. And the first thing they say is that if it's a major that you can do in Qatar, you should just stay in Qatar. Even though the scholarship list and things like that. Now, I know that, they are still sending students and stuff like that, but a lot of them, they're just saying like, well, if you can do this major in Qatar, you should just stay, rather than sending them out for like undergrad specifically. So I know that's been some challenges that have occurred for students, that it used to be if you just applied to a school on scholarship, that was it, you just went. But now it's becoming even more competitive. I can see it's becoming competitive, or even, a little bit of wasta here and there to who gets in on the scholarship. If you get into the scholarship, what do you do? One of the questions I didn't add, but I should have. They did ask a question about, do you know about the scholarship? And you'd be surprised that more than half do not know anything about the scholarship or what schools are on the scholarship list. Granted, there's a whole thing I have a whole thing like how the scholarship was built and stuff, but it is interesting that in this data set of seeing that there are some that just do not know about the scholarship list and what schools are on there. So some of them are like, yeah, I'll take a look, but some of them are like, this is the first time I've heard about like what sort of scholarship list and everything like that, even though it's very like open in there. I mean, all government websites are very tough to get through. So I would say the same for Ministry of Educations as well. It's also very tough to get through because I've been through it and it is hard to get through and something like that, especially when I did my undergrad, had to do scholarship stuff for it, and it is a nightmare to get through. But yeah, those are some of the I see that being a challenge upcoming. Is what does the ministry want, especially for undergrads? Where do they want to send them? I know, again, Qatar has developed poured a lot of resources into higher ed in Qatar, because we've opened up a bunch of other universities, and I mean, some of them are not accredited yet, but they have them open now, so like in hopes of being accredited and things like that, because I do think they want to try to keep their students here and stuff like that, for especially undergrad in Qatar.
Can I follow up and ask what kinds of majors are favored for education abroad? Would it be physics or?
I mean, I think it's your very stereotypical of like business, engineering, some sciences here and there. I had a friend who did try to apply for like a social science degree, and he was rejected, even though he applied to a school on the list. Interesting. But he was not given the scholarship because they said, you can just do it in Qatar. Just go to Qatar University. It's there. You can do it there. So I think they're still favoring those that go into those certain STEM fields and stuff like that. But of course, I know that they're also at the same time are saying we have too many engineers, so we need them to do other things. Obviously, the hot topic right now is computer science and like AI work and stuff like that. Like that's sort of the new hot thing that they want Qataris especially to go into and stuff like that. So in cybersecurity and stuff like that.
Data centers.
Data centers, yeah, very much. So
one final thing is, what about the role of the Qatar Foundation?
Yeah.
One of the online people were asking about research in Qatar.
Yeah.
How open is it to an application from a US-based scholar? And to what extent does it play any role in encouraging scholarship at the higher education level in Qatar and abroad?
Very good question, Dr. Cole. I don't know much about Qatar Foundation because I'm not in Qatar Foundation, but I'm sure as like Qatar Foundation, this is where a lot of the US branch campuses are housed and stuff. It would be a very different process from like Qatar University, which is the public institution of Qatar. I mean, I would think possibly they could be open to collaboration and stuff. I know like HBKU, Hamad bin Khalifa University is one to look at and see if there's any like projects or anything that they're doing, because I know they've been doing some good work and stuff like that. Not just like education, but like the field, like not the education, but like other topics that take place in the Middle East and everything like that. That's one institution in there that I know would be. I have no idea about the US branch campuses. That's something I'm not privy to, knowing what kind of research and stuff like that they do and stuff. We used to have a collaboration with Qatar University in Georgetown, but yeah, it's sort of like I don't know what to say. Like, I would say you probably have an easier time with Qatar Foundation than like Qatar University or any other like national-esque institution. So yeah, Qatar Foundation would be one. HBKU, Hamad bin Khalifa University, Qatar Foundation would be one to see if there's anyone doing any research and stuff like that.
Thank you for the presentation. It was interesting to me how many of the things that were significantly associated with the decision to go abroad being almost more individual factors, right? So like knowledge of the visa process or talking with a counselor or different things like that. What do you feel are the levers that like education institutions, high schools, maybe, you know, Qatar Foundation, like whoever, right? What are the levers do you feel would be helpful in trying to make that potentially more equitable, because it does seem so individualistic. So, you know, some people it's purely a knowledge barrier, right? So where do you see, you know, potentially more like promotion or awareness or intervention, so to speak, being helpful?
So interesting enough, there are some questions that look at college fair sort of information fairs. Yeah. I didn't look too deep into it, but that is a question that I did add myself into the project because I'm interested to know, I mean, in my time when I went to school, we did have a college fair, and that's how I knew some schools that I applied to in undergrad. I've not heard very much these days about if there are some that I do know that are sponsored by like some of the branch campuses, and they invite other partners and things like that, other schools of like, I guess the same conference you could say. In terms of like that's one place I would think is like having college fairs, but I think not just having college fairs like where we had mine was at a hotel. I think it needs to be in the schools. Like they need to have these in the schools, and especially in the public school system, there needs to be like this motion of like, how do we get, I mean, and this is not just to say for abroad institutions, but like even for local institutions, they need to come in and like talk about their colleges and things like that to help students make those decisions, because in a sense it is a very individualistic, unless you have someone that you know and things like that who have gone through the process or are going through the same process as you. I think that's one like lever I would put as a place to improve, is giving information, because you don't get very much in terms of like, it's very individualistic sort of and stuff. And especially if you don't also have parents who didn't go to college, or they did, but it's also changed and they haven't kept up with the changes, so they don't know anything. So they say, well, I didn't know. Well, I did by myself, so good luck to you to find out. So it's like that sort of thing of like information finding. And I think is one of the things I would like to take back after doing this is what are some of the things that we can do as a policy to help Qatari students, especially parents as well, make decisions and stuff.
I'll ask one then. So in your initial observations of your data, you were looking basically at those binaries, right? Have you been able to determine, or is this a question that you can look at in the future more specifically, how much difference there is in that gender disparity? Like, for example, there was that 50-50 of importance of, what was it, local or abroad?
Yeah,
But it was 50-50 on the whole data set. But
Yeah.
if you're examining between male participants and female participants,
No,
do
I
you
would
think
be-
there will be?
I would, so my expectation
Yeah,
is I would see that female students are more likely obviously to stay locally and not choose to go abroad, things like that. That's something I do expect to see. Whether I see that would be interesting or not, but I really do expect it not to change in that sense of that women, mostly female students, will be sticking in Qatar and stuff like that. And I mean, we can see it in like sort of the graduation classes of different institutions in Qatar. Majority of them are female, so as opposed to male. So that's like a small indication of what I'm like seeing and stuff like that, or what I expect to see is based on that indication.
Are there policy things that you might recommend in the future that might help balance that out a little bit more?
I mean, I think it's more, that's something that's a very cultural
Of course.
thing, and that's a very like tough like sell in some way, because some families are just more open to sending their child across to a different country and stuff like that. So I would say that is a very like not political but like very cultural question that cannot. Yeah, I don't think it would be.
That's not something you can impose. That's
Yeah, I
something-
could pose and stuff like that. So yeah, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay,
Alrighty.
I think that's about it. We're at
Could
5.
I-
Yeah,
could I
yeah,
just
sure.
ask- We have, I wondered what your reaction was. How did you choose to come to the University of Michigan? We have two Michigan undergraduates here. These questions that Mo is raising are kind of universal.
Well, my parents are foreign, so they always were really big on education, and I also wanted to stay close to home. I'm from really close to here, so I just wanted to go to the best school I could that was in state, and no other school in Michigan really compares to Michigan. So yeah, that's how I chose.
Well, you won't find any argument in this one. What about you? What would you say?
Yeah, it was very similar. Like I was the first of my siblings to get into UMich, so that's why like especially my older brother, he really pushed me to go to UMich.
No, those are things I'm interested in.
Those dynamics are not very different from.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I think that's why I had like questions. I added some of those communication questions of like talking to your siblings. I think there's also a question of like, are you the first in your family to go to college and stuff like that? So how does that play a role in whether like where you go and so? I mean, I had some like I would say I had a lot on my siblings and like where they went, but they did talk about like we did talk about like where they're going and why they're choosing that school. Most of it was very typical of what I was talking about, like, well, my friends are going here, so I'm gonna go here. Or hey, I like Florida because Florida is similar to Qatar's weather, so I will go to Florida instead of going anywhere else. So that's like one reason. Or like again, local home of like being in so my mother's from Tennessee, and so choosing the local school of like where my mom is from, like I was like, yeah, it's local. I've been around this part, so use it. So that's interesting.
I'm really curious what's going on underneath the hood for the more staying local when you talk to your siblings. Like, is the nature of those conversations like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
that's
miss you, please stay," versus like, it's scary out there, you can't see.
no, I think that's something I'm interested in. I think one of the things I definitely would like to do post dissertation and continuation of this project is to do more focus group style things of like having those real conversations, because yeah, seeing that, like, you know, how does like your siblings or cousins or someone like close to you, how do those affect your decisions, and like where did you even talk to them, what did you talk about, and stuff like that. And so, you know, this was just like, you know, more quantitative style, but I'd love to add some qualitative work into it and continue this project because it's very near and dear to my heart. I mean, I would say that as someone that's doing this dissertation. So yeah.
It's good to like what you're doing.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. I think that's an important lesson I would tell people if they're going in doing any research is like what you're doing. So that is something that I very much have taken to heart with this topic, especially on why do we do this? Why do we go to college? All of this. Why do we do all these things? So it's an interesting topic for me. It's been one that's been on my mind for a long since I began at Iowa. To be frank, it's been something on my mind. I'm like, why do we go? What are we? I think one of the other. Sorry, there's a bit of a tangent. Like one of the interesting things I've been thinking about is just like, what do we want our students to get out going to college, and what does that mean for students? Because I've seen a lot of the exit surveys here in the United States of what students expected, and then it turns out it wasn't what they expected that they got out. So it's like, all right, so where's the, well, in the sense of like your face over there telling me like, well, I think it's in part to do like what is, so one of the things that I've seen in the exit surveys is talking about financial literacy, and they never got that in college. Like, and that's apparently something they really want. And I'm like, interesting. So what does that mean for universities? What does that mean? Like, how do we bridge the things that they want while also at the same time teaching them the things that the majors and stuff that they're interested in and stuff like that. So, yeah. Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.